Kotter's recording now, and we'll also look at Kotter's 8-step change process, talk high level about if you're managing a change, the importance of having a change team and the sort of skills you want with it. And then we'll just touch on a few other aspects to do with change, because this is quite a lot of content in here. We will send you the slides if you're someone who wants this. We're recording the webinar, and I say there's lots and lots of content that we also have. One thing I'll ask my colleague Caitlin to share with you, because you've all joined this and it's about change, is we also have a change toolkit, which is a series of documents that are available. It's basically www.changesuperhero.com, I think is the link. If it's not, I'm sure Caitlin will drop it in the chat, and you just have to register for that, and that gives you access to lots of the content. Obviously, ideally, you can buy the book because it tells you how to use the content, but say if you're running change for yourself, that's got lots of tools in it, like planning change and some handouts and infographics, so loads of useful stuff on it. So just brief introduction to myself if you haven't come across me before. So my name's Lucinda. I'm doing this as part of my day job is CEO of Actus Software. I also host the HR Uprising podcast, and actually again that's where there's loads of free content. If you search for change, I've done a number of podcast episodes on that. So I've talked about the book, and I'm a keen but average netball player, and I'm going on tour to Bognor Regis on Friday, and I'm very excited. Are there any other netballers out here, I wonder? Okay, so quick overview, introduction to Actus. There's a few more people just arriving in here. It's that lunchtime, isn't it, as people are just joining us in as we go. So in case you haven't come across us, I know some of you know us, in fact, our customers. We talk about ourselves now as the complete performance, talent and learning management suite. So essentially, we started out as a performance management provider, but now we do much more than performance management. We have a brand new product 360 now. We do some training courses, which I'll just mention in a moment. And essentially, it's a product that it can grow with you. So we've got learning management, talent management, etc. So if you or anyone else are looking for something in that area, it's worth checking out the website or getting in touch. And then one more plug, which is easier to do at the start, just because we're at the stage now in terms of our management essentials in 2022. I do run a change superhero course, but that's got a waiting list running for it at the moment. In June, we will be running, and actually there's no date on that, we'll be running, it's about halfway through June. It starts, we've got probably about 4 places left on there. And it's basically management essentials. This is a program we started running during lockdown. It started out as virtual manager, it was updated to be hybrid manager, and now it's just basically management essentials, management 101, ideal for brand new managers or experienced managers who've never had any training or want to brush up or polish up on it. And it's all done remotely, but it's made very, very relevant to their specific situation. Okay, so let's get on to the topic in question, which is all about change. Peter Senge is quoted as this, although sometimes people say that he's one of the most misquoted individuals. So he's quoted as someone who says, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. Now, whether or not that's a quote that he came up with himself, I certainly think that that is something that's really, really relevant. So if you're in a position, and actually asking you there, what in terms of thinking about what your role in change might be, I'll ask you that in a moment after the poll we're putting up. I certainly think that if something's done to you, they often talk about it with regard to selling. People don't like being sold to, but they like to buy. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. People don't like having things done to them. So one of the cruxes, the simplest thing about being a change superhero is essentially being somebody who helps others to decide to change. You show them the way forward, you help them to buy into it. And that's a key benefit of it, or a key aspect to consider. Now, of course, everybody has a different attitude to change, and not everybody likes change. And I think there is a personality aspect to that. So I'm launching a poll here just to see, of the people we've got here, I'm just going to make sure my door's shut. What's your normal view towards change? How do you see it? Do you love it? Do you seek it out? Do you hate it? You know, dig your heels in first, or are you sort of ambivalent about it? Those of you who've done Myers-Briggs, I think that certain styles, one of the personality types in Myers-Briggs, I write about it in the book, I think is much more predisposed to liking change than others. So sometimes you seek it out or you're easily bored. Certainly if you are an N, like the big picture, or maybe an NP, that might make you somebody so an intuition perceiver, that might mean that you're more attracted to change. That's just my own theory. I can't prove it, but those are the things that correlate. So we've got 72% participation. If anyone else wants to participate in your response to change, please do so. And then I'm going to end the poll and share it. So we've got a lovely bell curve here. So you guys are saying that you're all neutral, or the majority of you are neutral. Slightly more love it than hate it. Interesting. So either of those are good, because if you're neutral, great, you can be open-minded. If you love change, then you might seek out change. And you may assume that when you've bought into an exciting new change and you're involved in driving it, that everyone's going to see the positives like you. But actually, they may not, because there's just as many people who absolutely detest change. It stresses them out, it makes them anxious, and they'd really rather not at all. So if you're in that zone where it's really not your cup of tea, then it's interesting, because you can probably, as a change agent, think of all the things that you don't like about a particular change, find out the answers to them, and that could make you a really good person to help others buy into a change. So if we think about why change is relevant, and this is my question to you, please tell me in the chat, is there anything in particular that brings you to this topic? I mean, fine if it's just something you want to know a little bit about, you know, you're educating yourself in your lunch hour, or are you involved in leading a change? Have you got change going on in your organization? Tell me if there's anything specific, or, you know, general or specific, about why you've chosen to come in and listen to this particular webinar. So use the chat to tell us that, and welcome to the people who've just been arriving. I've been letting people in as we've gone through it. We do use the chat really actively. Often we find that people network in the chat box and help solve each other's problems, which is brilliant. So don't be shy. Do use the chat. Tell us why or what's going on with regard to change. Are you expected to be a change agent yourself, or is this just for your development? So as I say, both, I've seen two people so far, so it's about developing you. Great. Okay, so in that case, lunch and learn's very, very legitimate, and hats off to you for applying yourself there. So we know that COVID hopefully is in the past for most of us in the UK. I'm not sure that everybody is in the same position, because we've got people from overseas. But there's still loads of change going on all the time. I mean, it's a cliche to say that, you know, change is always happening, but it really is. And you may be involved in establishing new ways of working within your organization, rolling tech out to support hybrid working, or something else. Performance management, that's an example that we work with businesses to do that. You may need to try and change culture in terms of aspects of flexible working, well-being, inclusivity, diversity, whatever it is, or you may be, you know, redesigning the organization in some way. So I'll keep an eye on the chat there, and I'll come back and look at that in a moment when we have another poll. So what we're going to do here in this, and for some of you who've just joined the webinar, there's quite a lot of content in this. It's quite a high level whiz through a few aspects. So there is some theory, so it's quite good for a lunch and learn point of view. I'm going to start by just whizzing through what I call the 5 superpowers of a change superhero. And you can go into those in more detail if you wanted to, either by listening to one of my podcasts, they're all available free, or you can get the book that I wrote on this topic, available on Amazon, or Kindle if you wanted to, or Audible, in fact, if you wanted to go into more detail. But because this is sort of a half an hour, 45-minute webinar, I'm going to just chat through the superpowers that I think we should think about if we want to be leading change. And I can see a number of you are leading change here. So some about it's about understanding the process of change. And when I talk about Kotter, so Mike, for you, that's really relevant. Could be again for yourself, Katerina, a number of you there where you're leading change projects. Mark and Stephanie, I can see you're saying you're leading themselves. Some of this starts with us as people, getting people to buy into change. It's all about actually really helping people to, you almost have to be that person, be that change in terms of that. Again, trying not to be full of cliches. So if you are somebody who is leading change in an organization, as we did earlier, we noticed that we did a survey, and we know that lots of people are really neutral to a change. Lots of people hate change, but some people love change. Okay, so what we may need to do is have the courage to stand up and be counted about a change. It's not about being shy. We have to be prepared to really lead it and communicate it. And I'll allude to later, Kotter, who's a big change guru, says you can never over communicate change. you need to communicate it 10 times more than you think you do, which is interesting. So you might think you told people something, that doesn't mean they're actually going to change. So the skills that we've got here, really, this is talking about, some of you might recognize those skills there. Actually, if you do know where they come from, let me know in the chat. Do you recognize this, if you come across it before? Self-awareness, self-control, self-motivation, empathy, and social skills, where they might have come from. So really what I'm saying as part of this Okay, I'm back. I was kicked out. I apologize. I'm not quite sure why. Hello. Thank you. Right, sorry about that. Where was I? Right, I was asking you in the chat as to whether or not you recognized So what I was saying as I was talking to myself, as I vanished from the screen, was this is all from emotional intelligence. Have you come across emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman's work? And the thing about emotional intelligence is it's really key in leadership, it's really key in developing others, and really you are acting as a leader, whatever your position in change. Thank you, Caitlin. My slides have dropped off as well. So me trying to come time slides back. Okay, hope running and again. I'll just check. Can you just confirm to me you can see my slides and you can hear me? Thank you for your patience. All right, so fabulous. Okay. Right, so emotional intelligence, we'll move on from this here. I need lots of self-awareness here as to whether you can see my screen or otherwise. If you want to know more about emotional intelligence, there's plenty you can find out about it, but these are the fundamental cornerstones of it. How are they relevant to change? Well, self-awareness, you need to know what's your natural style of change, what's your natural reaction to change. Do you buy into it or do you hate it? So you're going to have a natural bias, everybody does. And you need to use that when you're trying to take others with you in terms of that. So you need to match others in terms of helping them come across. In terms of self-control, you might actually personally not agree with the change or not like it, but from a professional point of view, you've been tasked with leading it. So you might need to be restrained about what you say about it without being untruthful, but you might need to be on message. You might have to be really highly self-motivated in terms of working hard to talk to people, to engage people, to bring people on. That's going to also correlate with having social skills. You can't lead change without talking to people and winning people over. So having empathy and understanding why, in terms of a change, some people, even if it's a perceived good change, will still feel that they're losing something. So all of these skills are really important. And I wrapped it all under courage, because it does take courage to really understand yourself and be prepared to work on your blind spots. And very occasionally, I talk about this in the book. I remember I was very much involved when I was in the organizations I worked for, having to be a change agent myself. And sometimes you will have people who are senior to you and they are difficult and they're not on message and they're almost going against the change in question. And you may have to have the courage to challenge them. Now, that doesn't mean being rude to them. You've got to challenge them with lots of empathy, and lots of sort of diplomacy, actually. So you have the courage to challenge people that are more senior. So courage is a key area. And as we go through each of these 5 traits, I'm going to go through the rest of them pretty quickly. I want you to have a think about what's your natural strength and which one would you want to develop. So we'll do a quick poll at the end if these in terms of that. So think, is that one that you're good at, or is that one that you could do more of in terms of courage? The second one is connect with strategy. Now, in terms of organizational change, because that's what we're talking about, the context here, you need to think, why are we doing this? Why is the organization doing this? There must be a reason. Do I understand the reason? Do others understand the reason? Now, again, people don't always like it, but you need to understand, you might need to ask questions in order to understand it. You also, therefore, if you're leading a change, need to help create a vision and a sense of meaning. And some of you are saying that you're leading change yourself, and it may be you've been asked to do something and you don't know why. Someone's just said, just do it, and you can't see the benefits. You need to find out what the benefits are, even if you have to, again, be courageous enough, ask people more senior to you, or try and create that vision. And then once we've got that vision, people need to know what the steps are in order to get there. So they need to know why we're doing it, connect with strategy, because it gives people purpose and motivation if you've got that. My third trait is corroboration. And this is where we talk about using evidence to lead the need for change. Now, I've done more on this. So this is influencing, which is Lencioni's work. And again, there is a podcast on this. As I'm saying these out, I'm sure Caitlin will put them all, we'll send the slides out to you afterwards, because there's quite a lot of content here. Again, I've done a podcast on this. So Caitlin can put the link to that specific podcast on the influencing one. If you want to know more about influencing shortcuts, it's in the Change Superhero course as well. You can get that. But fundamentally, if you're communicating to people, it's about making sure that your communication is convincing. So corroboration, so it's not saying just do it because I think we should. It's about saying, well, we actually need to carry out this restructure, or move site because, and you give people logical reasoning why this has to happen. You might give examples, so social proof why a similar business says you should do that. You might appeal to authority, so it might be that a specific authority. So if you're a doctor, then the BMA would be, this is in Britain, would be your authority. Whatever country you're in, your local government would be an authority. So having different ways in which we can evidence why we need to change, again, this all helps unblock people in terms of getting rid of the inertia. I mentioned that Kotter said you needed to communicate change way more than you think you should. And that's something there. I'm sorry about the sound, Katerina, because can some of my guys tell me if it's any different? What I can do is try and plug in I'm assuming it's my broadband that's causing the problem. I don't know, because I've just been kicked off for those people who just joined. I can try and plug in. Okay, great. It will just distract me if I have to go and try and plug into my hotspot. Communication. We all know about communication. It's about rapport, it's about listening, and it's all about talking to people. And then my fifth superhero trait is collaboration. So we can't lead change on our own. We have to take others with us. We have to involve others. And we is the word we need to use if we want to do change, because it's about how are we going to get there? How do we all go along together? And that means being somebody who is open to others. We're open-minded, we welcome differences, we use positive language, we encourage people, we reinforce it when people do the right behaviors. So it's being really positive about things, and again, using all of those other skills in terms of working with others. And then the final point to collaboration is building a change lead, because you can't do it on your own. And very briefly, anyone on here used Belbin before? Have you come across Belbin before? Just say yes if you have in the chat. Have you come across Belbin? Yes, so some of you tell me. So Belbin's team roles. So if you haven't, don't worry, it's quite straightforward. But here is a very simple way in which you could think about Belbin's team roles. So my experience of building change, and you don't have to, in fairness, you don't have to do a Belbin survey. Most people understand these terms quite simplistically, but different people have different skills at different times of a project. So in Belbin terms, coordinator is exactly as you think, someone who's good at organising others. Resource investigator is good at getting things started. They're good at getting resources, again, as it suggests. And the shaper is somebody who is quite directive, sometimes upsets people, but they're really good at creating a sense of urgency. So if you're going to work on a long-term project, those people are really useful at the start of a project, but some of them are less useful at the end. If I looked at resource investigator, we all know the people who are great at starting, but they lose interest, or they haven't got the eye for detail towards the end. So if you're involved in a project that's going to be more than a couple of months, then maybe think about having different people involved at different times in the project, so that you've got enough energy to see it through. When I show you the Kotter model later, you'll see that actually some of the time that there isn't that people don't see things through. The reason that change fails is because the latter parts of the project don't take place. So in the middle, implementers and team workers. So implementers are really great workhorses. Team worker is someone good at keeping everyone talking to each other, keeping the fun in there, keeping things light. And then at the end, monitor evaluator, people who are great at just checking the detail, checking things have been done efficiently and effectively, and completer finisher, who's going to dot the I's and cross the T's. Again, this is just a taster of things. These are just ideas, hopefully to inspire you. You probably need to look at it in a little bit more detail. Now, I did say that I was going to ask you to think, which one do you think of the 5 superpowers? I appreciate there's been a few people coming in as we've gone through. So of our superpowers, let me just share another, what do you say is the one that you use most frequently, or you're already pretty effective at? So choose one of these. So let you choose one of those. So courage is good at standing up and being counted, use your emotional intelligence. One was about understanding why. Corroboration was about being able to give evidence for why we should change. Influential communication. Communication is someone who's just a great communicator, overall generally strong at that. And then collaboration is someone who's really good at bringing others in. So all of those are relevant. Which one do you think is the one that you feel that you're really using already, which is fantastic? Well done. Let's share that one. If anyone else wants to quickly participate before I share the poll? Well done. Nearly at 70%, over 70%. I'll go 3, 2, 1. I'll end and share. Okay, great. And then if you were going to develop one, I wonder if we're going to get exactly the opposite pattern. Not necessarily. So which of those 5 would you develop? So we're saying most of them here, we're actually, collaboration is our main strength for this group here. And maybe corroboration is the main development area relatively, or so it's not as obvious a strength for everybody. So let's try this one. Which change power would you most like to develop? Or you think it's most useful to develop, or do you use the least? And you need to choose those. Interesting. Okay. Good levels of participation. Anyone else want to go? I'm going to go 3, 2, 1. Okay, ending the poll, sharing the results. So interestingly, actually almost even between courage, linking with strategy, and corroboration. So brilliant. That self-awareness in itself is really useful. So thinking about, right, what do I need to do? So we take one thing from this about the traits is, what can I do to do more of this? What can I do to challenge myself to do more? Okay, so the key to remember, in my experiences, these are typical things that make change fail. It's usually all about people things. People are not brought into it. Sometimes it's because the change hasn't been thought through well enough. And we'll look at the Kotter model as to where change often falls down. Sometimes it's because there's no sense of urgency. So we haven't created an artificial sense of urgency or something similar to that. So people just drift along. So the change never really happens. You never get a sense of momentum. That can be caused by a lack of clear expectations or vision, or a lack of leadership or sponsorship. Occasionally it's down to resistance, but usually you only get resistance because you haven't had leadership or expectations. And occasionally, as I say, it loses follow through, and that's sometimes related to the lack of sense of urgency. So if you've been in a project, you think one that's failed, think to yourself, which of those might have made which of those could have been changed that might have made a difference, which of those might have made it fail. In terms of the models of things. There's Lewin talks about his change model, and he says in order for us to be able to make a change, you've actually got to unfreeze the old way of going, make the change, and then refreeze. You can't expect people just to switch and make the change, certainly not in an organizational sense. And that will link into the Kotter model, which is an 8-step program, which I'm going to take you through in a moment. So if you think about it, I think that, let's say I've got a Father Christmas shaped ice cube, and I want to make it into an Easter bunny shaped ice cube. I realize it's quite random. Then obviously I can't just say switch it over and just put the Father Christmas shaped ice cube into the Easter bunny mold. I have to literally melt it and let it go turn to water and then refreeze it. So that's the concept. And so some of that is, what do we need to do to unfreeze our organization? And this is all about buy-in. It's about communicating the vision. It's about creating that sense of urgency. All those reasons why changes fail. In the interest of time, I'm going to whiz over these two. Lots of you will have come across force field analysis, and we've got some materials on that in the toolkit. But essentially, if you're thinking about managing a change at a change organizational level, it may be worth doing some analysis. So if you're thinking, what's the change, think about what are the driving forces, or who are the driving forces, and what are the restraining forces. So then you have an idea of where to put your energy in terms of working on reducing the restraining forces, getting people to buy in, and increasing the driving forces. The other tool that you might think about, you sometimes see, is called the change equation. And this is really saying, if you want to make change, the ease to which you can do that will be dependent on these basic aspects. So lots of people will change more easily if they are highly dissatisfied with the status quo. And this is your example of the burning platform, if you've heard that analogy. So actually, people will decide to jump into the North Sea if they're on a burning platform, but other than that, they probably wouldn't have done, particularly because that might not have been a very attractive vision. So we need to get people to make a change. We need to say dissatisfaction with the status quo. So help people understand, and this is what we're doing about unfreezing, help people understand why the current situation isn't satisfactory, or certainly won't be if we carry on that way. We also need to help people understand why the future might be more attractive if we make the change. Even with both of those being there, if we perceive that change to be very difficult or very costly, it's going to make it harder. So all of those factors all have to be factored in, the ease of which you're going to be able to achieve change. Okay, so I've talked a number of times about Kotter, and again, we're not going to do it justice in here, so you can go back and look at any of these in more detail, but it will give you a little bit of an overview of it. So John Kotter, he wrote, I think this book was called Our Iceberg is Melting, which is one of these parables of the penguins going around under an iceberg, which is basically going through these 8 steps. These 8 steps, I think, are really useful if you are doing an organizational change, a large scale change, not so relevant for a smaller scale change. And as we go through this, have a think as to, if you've worked with a change before, you've been involved in a change before, think about when that change, well, did it succeed or did it fail? And if you can maybe think of a change that you've been involved with, wasn't that successful, and think, where in this process did things go wrong or not happen? So what you can see on this screen here is that I've overlaid Lewin's unfreeze, change, and refreeze, and those different colors, so it can help you think about how you might do this. So let's say you're involved in this change. The interesting thing is, sometimes with organizational change, we, the change agent, don't even get told about it until it gets to this unfreeze change point, because we might be someone involved in communicating. Ideally, then we have to go back to the beginning, or we would be involved from the start. So in a scenario where we need to make a change, we need to start off by establishing a sense of urgency. And you do that by identifying a potential crisis or a major opportunity. So if we carry on like this, we're going to go out of business. If we carry on trading online without a website, we're going to lose out on huge amounts of business. We can't afford to carry on like this. Or we might see a major opportunity that everybody's switching to a certain way of, everyone's switching to electric, or there's massive government subsidies in place for us if we go onto electric cars. Therefore, let's work on developing our renewable batteries, or whatever our nomenclature for. You know what I'm talking about here. So basically spotting an opportunity where people say, okay, I understand that, we need to make a change in strategy in order to tap into that opportunity or to avoid that crisis. So that gives us urgency. You then need to have a powerful guiding coalition, and depending on how big that is, how big the change is, depends on the size of the coalition. And that's where ideally you think about the mix of people within it, because typically in an organization, the people in there are either there because they're very senior, or they are in there because they have practical job roles that are affected by it. They may not necessarily have the interpersonal skills of being a change agent. So thinking about that bell bin thing as well, or are they going to be into the detail? Are they good at driving things through? Those sort of things. So if you get involved and you've already got a few people there, think about the skills that are maybe missing from that coalition. Then we need to create a vision, which is the whole why. So we understand why there's a sense of urgency. We need to create that vision and the messaging as to what it is we're going to do, how we need to get there. We then need to start to communicate it. And I say this is where this change, the shift point, quite often in a large organization, the stuff in purple, the unfreezing, has all taken place with a very small group of people in a darkened room. So when we come to here, these people might have been talking about this change 4 months, but the people who are hearing about it here, the first time they've ever heard about it. So they're going to go through lots of emotional responses related to hearing change for the first time. So what we need to do is communicate that in lots of ways. There's lots we can do on that, but we won't do that now. But you need to make sure that people understand why, and they have a chance to ask their questions. They have people empathizing if they are demonstrating emotional responses to it, and helping people to process this change message. As we talked about earlier, some people will process it more quickly, some people will process it less quickly and be more resistant. But we have to keep on communicating it, and we have to keep the change moving. So the next step with that is you might need to remove obstacles or involve other people who can help drive that change through. So let's say we're using old systems or old processes, then maybe we need to change those structures that are effectively reinforcing the old way of working. Really importantly is to move through that change and have some symbolic gestures and communications where you see short-term wins. So if we've developed a new green battery, the first win, the first time we buy that, or if we've restructured in some way and we've got a new brand name, our first communication, our first newsletter with that on, the first award that we get with our new brand name, it's creating short-term wins that reinforce the fact that that change had to happen and that change was in fact a good idea. And it also is about recognizing those people who've gone around this curve and are changing, have got on board, they've got on the bus. So short-term wins and communicating those is really, really important. Rhetorical question to you: why do you think it's really important to create those short-term wins? What's the benefit of it? You have a chance to think about that as you can create those. I know there's always a delay, so maybe someone typing it in, but absolutely, Katerina, on the money there. Absolutely, it's about proof, and it's about proof, social proof, and also real proof to people that motivation. Yeah, Mike, absolutely, and showing people that it's the right thing to do. So those people also, one of the things we talk about with change is some people might be sitting in denial or resistance. So when they see that other people have gone round and actually the vision is good and people, it's going to motivate others that it's the right thing to do. And then the other bit, this is the refreeze bit, which I think is often missed off. Quite often organizations, if they make it through the change curve, they then get to the other side and they lose interest. And that's why I think you need to have those people who are good at taking it on to the next level. So can you build on that change, consolidate it? So what we really need to do is make sure that we are refreezing in the new way. So that might be about consolidating things, adding to the change, building on the change, and anchoring it. So you really communicate why it's here to stay, why it's the right thing. You change your reporting so it aligns with that new way of working, give people targets that have that new product set in, whatever it might be, but it's freezing in that new way. So that's a very quick run through the Kotter change model, and it's something that's quite a lot to get in the first time if you haven't seen it before. And so there's other things you can look at, but I think it's worth being aware of. I asked earlier if you could think of a change that maybe didn't work so well in an organisation that you've been involved in. And if you can you think whereabouts in the change process it fell down? What was missing? Check, so I've got them up there. So well done. Some of you are already there. And it's quite a complex one to answer. You're doing really well, actually. You've got over 50% have managed to come up with an answer. I'll just give you a few more seconds to have a think. And it may be there's other changes, and it may be that there were multiple places where it went wrong. But it's interesting. This is quite interesting. I've got a theory. So anyone else want to choose where you felt it went wrong? And I'll share the results. Okay, ending the poll now. Sharing the results. So how interesting that no one said create a vision. Now here's a hypothesis. Is that because that basically change, you've seen lots of times where people have just basically created a vision, maybe said it once, but then they haven't communicated it well, they haven't involved others, they haven't done any of the other bits? Is that like, sometimes I think people think that doing change is just creating a vision. Just some thought there, maybe not. What's interesting is that you've got throughout the piece. Now I'm seeing here that communicating is quite wrong. Perhaps it wasn't communicated well enough or frequently enough, but that actual making the change hasn't happened. But equally over here in terms of the consolidating and anchoring the change, so that's quite even. One of the things that I've noticed anecdotally when I've worked through this in work groups is that highest risk areas, in my opinion, are around the change marks. So often people might create the vision, but they just extent get a few short-term wins, but then not drive it through to completion, so they don't maximize it. And that's the key risk. So just my little suggestion here, if you want to think about this model and use it as a change agent, and you change agent role, thinking about your role from this. So if you've been brought in, wherever you're brought in, make sure that there is sponsorship for the change in terms of getting that sense of urgency and know why. Agree some timelines, right? Make sure there are some deadlines that are realistic, but not so long that there's no urgency. You then might be able to influence, have you got the right people? There will be people that are out of your control, but making sure you've got the right people, considering personal attributes, possible resistors, seniority and availability, people likely to actually get involved. In terms of the vision, is it exciting? Is it relevant? Lots of visions are really sterile and very much the benefit of the shareholders, for example. So you might have a change because we've got to increase shareholder market, you're talking to people about shareholder returns, and actually this is somebody on the shop floor or in a manufacturing organization, and they don't really care about shareholder returns. What they want to know is why they've been affected by the change. In terms of communicating the vision, we need loads of people to communicate a vision in lots of different ways. So don't just do one format, don't just do email, and do utilize that senior convincing sponsor who's going to be on message. In terms of moving obstacles, ensure that people's natural reactions, resistance to change are accommodated. Ensure that there's a range of approaches and styles and people have time to ask questions. Make sure the wins are shouted about and there's lots of recognition. Again, use your senior leaders to support with that. Don't stop going. That's a really key thing. So sometimes in a long change project, it's useful to bring in different people to carry it on. So it might be around this point in terms of the short-term wins, that's an opportunity for those people who started the change to step down, and you bring in people with fresh energy whose job it is to really maximize the value of the change, and they'll set new objectives, new goals that help you get that benefit, and then you can measure and monitor the positives of the results of it after the change has happened, so you actually can see the value of doing the change, and it gets to the end point, it's completed, or it becomes business as usual. Okay, so last slide. Change superheroes, we've talked about quite a lot here, but in summary, you need to have the courage to initiate change or to follow change and take people with you. Use your emotional intelligence, challenge people who aren't on side, even if they're above you. You might need to understand what the why of the strategy is, even if it's not clearly communicated, so you can take others with you. You will persuade people to buy into the change rather than tell them they have to. You're going to be flexible in communicating change using all your different capabilities and rapport and listening to people. And it's about collaborating and encouraging teamwork. You'll then utilize things like the change equation, being aware of what drives people towards and away from change, and think about Kotter in terms of the areas where change naturally falls down, in terms of that point where we unfreeze, make the change, or we make the change and then we try and refreeze. So I covered lots, including a mini couple of minutes drop off where I vanished completely from the screen. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to pop in the chat, or things that they're going to take away from here? Okay, let's put, yeah. So if you want to do more about it, some of you are involved in change. I go into this in much more detail. In fact, I go through the entire content of the book. It's really interactive on the Change Superhero training program. If you're interested in that for you or others, we're running a waiting list for this at the moment, and the link's there. There's various other things that will come out to you that we'll just put links, things like the podcast that I've done on this if you've want other content, because I've got huge amounts of content on there. If you want to read more about it, recommend the book. As I say, it's available out there. Oh, that was right on cue there, Caitlin. Well done. So you can get all that, and there's also the business book, etc. So any of those there, the links are there for you in the chat. I'll keep an eye out if there's anyone's got any questions, just letting you know here what our future webinars will be. So we're talking about diversity in June, organisational development in July. We'll have a break in August, and then on to September, we're going to talk about onboarding. And as mentioned before, management essentials, that's got a few places left, starts on the 14th of June. And also we run an impact and influence training. Next one I'm running is an in-house one. So please do get in touch if any of these things would be of use to you. Further useful resources available here and links which will come out to you. So I can't see any questions in the chat at the moment.